Hello and welcome back to Outside Views. Today we're taking a deep dive into 5 key impacts of Brexit. 5 years after leaving the European Union, the consequences are becoming clearer, and the debate around the success or failure of Brexit continues to shape the political landscape. And let's start with trade. Leaving the EU meant that the UK was no longer part of the single market and the customs union. The UK did negotiate a free trade deal with the EU, avoiding tariffs, but it did not escape new barriers to trade. These non-tariff barriers include new paperwork requirements, customs checks, and regulatory divergence, which have increased costs and complications for businesses. The impact has been severe, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, the so-called SMEs. Unlike large multinational corporations, smaller businesses often lack the resources to handle the additional bureaucracy. Many have simply stopped exporting to the EU altogether. Studies suggest UK goods exports are between 6 and 30% lower than they would have been if the UK had remained in the EU. The government's independent financial watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, estimates that the Brexit would ultimately reduce trade by 15%, cutting the size of the UK economy by around 4%, equivalent to a loss of £100 billion. Brexit was supposed to enable Britain to strike its own trade deals, and so far new deals with Australia and New Zealand have been agreed upon, but their economic impact is minimal compared to the losses in EU trade. Hopes of a major trade deal with the United States have faded, and negotiations with India remain unresolved. The benefits of these new trade agreements pale in comparison to what the UK lost by leaving the EU. And now let's move on to immigration once again. Immigration was one of the central themes of the Brexit referendum. The Leave campaign argued that ending freedom of movement would give the UK control over its borders. And 5 years later, net migration to the UK is higher than before Brexit. The end of EU freedom of movement led to a sharp decline in EU migrants coming to the UK. However, non-EU migration has surged, driven by work visas in sectors like healthcare and social care, and by international students. UK universities struggling financially have actively recruited more students from non-EU countries. The Conservative government introduced visa restrictions in an attempt to reduce overall immigration numbers, including limiting dependence for international students and workers. And despite this, net immigration in 22 and 23 exceeded 900,000 annually, and that's far higher than the levels seen before Brexit. Brexit was meant to reduce immigration, but it has only changed its composition. Another major impact of Brexit has been on travel. For British tourists and business travellers, the end of free movement has led to longer queues at EU borders and the requirement for visas in some cases. The UK is also introducing its own version of the EU's new entry system, requiring travellers to apply for electronic travel authorization before entering the country. From 2025, the EU will introduce an automated entry-exit system which will replace manual passport stamping for UK travellers. 6 months later, the EU will also roll out ETIAS, a new visa waiver scheme that will require UK citizens to apply for travel clearance before visiting 30 European countries. And these changes will add costs and potential delays for British travellers, eroding the ease of movement that EU membership once provided. Brexit has also had a major impact on UK laws and regulations. One of the key promises of the Leave campaign was that Britain would regain sovereignty over its own laws. To minimize disruption, the UK initially retained thousands of EU laws. The previous Conservative government sought to repeal or revise these laws, but progress has been slow. As of today, only a small fraction of retained EU laws have been scrapped or replaced. Some regulatory changes have been made, such as a ban on exporting live animals for slaughter and modifications to EU gene editing regulations. Brexit has also allowed the UK to impose VAT on private school fees, something that was previously restricted under EU law. However, for the most part, British regulations remain closely aligned with EU standards simply because divergence would create even greater barriers to trade. And finally, let's discuss money. During the referendum, the Leave campaign claimed that Brexit would save the UK £350 million per week, which could be spent on the NHS instead. Well, the reality is far more complex. Before Brexit, the UK contributed around £80 billion per year to the EU budget. However, it received about £5 billion back in agricultural and regional development funding. And the UK also benefited from the EU's Horizon Research Programme, which it has now rejoined at an estimated cost of £2 billion per year. The financial settlement under the Brexit withdrawal agreement has also required the UK to make payments to the EU amounting to nearly £15 billion between 21 and 23, with further payments expected in the coming years. And while the UK no longer pays into the EU's budget, the economic costs of Brexit, through lost trade, investment and reduced economic growth, far outweigh any savings. So, what does all of this mean for Britain's future? Brexit's 5 key impacts on trade, immigration, travel, laws and money have reshaped the UK in profound ways. The economic consequences have been overwhelmingly negative, and the political landscape remains deeply divided. Despite growing public dissatisfaction with Brexit, there is little political appetite for reversing it. Labour's Keir Starmer has ruled out rejoining the single market or the customs union, focusing instead on improving UK-EU relations incrementally. The EU, meanwhile, has made it clear that any closer relationship would require commitments that the UK is unwilling to make. The Brexit debate is far from over, and its long-term consequences will continue to shape Britain's economy, but also its politics and international standing for years to come. And the question is, will Britain find a way to mitigate the damage, or will it remain stuck dealing with the fallout of a decision that many now regret? So thanks for watching Outside Views, and if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below the video. See you next time, and the next video is already right here in the end screen.